West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
I want to start with the piece you published to Medium. You write, quote, "Tragically, the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict reestablishes a dangerous precedent and sends a terrifying message and warning to the rest of us. It's the good old days again. If you're an aggrieved white person, you can take the law and guns into your own hands, stand your ground, be a violent vigilante, and let everyone know, by force if necessary, who's the real boss." I mean, I want you to just zoom out for me and talk about what it is that is at stake here, Waj.
It's the stake of America's future. It's whether or not we're going to stop white supremacy or we're going to see the death rattle of white supremacy transform into a death march. Whether we're going to let the good old boys be the good old boys again by taking a gun and claiming self-defense, even though they're the ones who instigate violence against black and brown bodies. Where a 17-year-old feels emboldened to take a gun to a community that he doesn't live in, lie that he's a medic, with an AR-15, shoot and kill two people and have the police later congratulate him, then gets acquitted and has three congressmen, as of now it's three congressmen, who say, hey, come be an intern. It's whether or not two men can chase a 25-year-old black man who's guilty of jogging in his neighborhood, pretty much engage in a modern-day lynching instead of calling the cops and then claim on the stand with self-defense. It's whether or not we allow George Zimmerman, even though he's told by the dispatch to stay in your car to hunt down a black kid who's guilty of walking in a hoodie, and then he claims self-defense and becomes a hero and a martyr. So what is the country that we want? A country where any aggrieved white man feels that he can take a gun and shoot and kill with impunity, and not just impunity, but then be a hero, a person who's given internships in Congress, a person who becomes a martyr, and the rest of us, meanwhile, are terrified of taking a knee to protest police brutality at a football game unless we get canceled by Colin Kaepernick. And so this is the question that people should be asking themselves. And also, the last thing I'll say is, white folks, you will not be spared, because the victims of Kyle Rittenhouse were white. And this is a remake in America's history, because white folks who tried to help black and brown folks when it came to desegregation, they were seen as race traitors and also killed by white folks. And look at the language that people are openly espousing right now, that they had it coming. These leftists had it coming. This is what they get. And when you got millions of Republicans now saying that violence should be rationalized and violence might be necessary to reclaim this country, where do you think and how do you think this ends?
Renee, you made this exact point on Twitter, writing, perhaps more white people will now recognize that white supremacy is an existential threat to their lives too. How are these forces a threat to everyone?
You know, it's really obvious. You know, what we're finding out, and we saw again on Friday, is How to Get Away with Murder isn't just the name of recent TV drama. It's the story of white supremacy in America. Even though the verdict shouldn't have been a surprise, it didn't make it any less devastating or upsetting. And this is not a small injustice. This wasn't just about one verdict in one trial. This emboldens and enables vigilantism, and that endangers everyone. That's what we saw in Kenosha. That's what we saw in Georgia with the murder of Ahmaud Arbery. This was about the idea that there are certain people in this country, white people, who feel deputized by their skin to enact justice, to keep the peace as they see it, as they define it, by any means necessary. And that endangers anyone. It's exactly what Waj said. You know, it cheapens Black lives, but it cheapens the lives of anyone who believes in equality and justice. And we have to understand, for those who missed the 400-year-old memo, not everyone gets to claim self-defense in America.
Alana, we have been focusing, for good reason, a lot on the inequalities that were on display in these trials. But bias, of course, takes form in every stage of the judicial process. The Washington Post reports concerns about racial discrimination in the justice system have shadowed the Arbery case from the beginning. They began with local authorities' response to the February 2020 shooting in coastal Georgia. A prosecutor quickly chalked it up to self-defense and found the three white men, one of whom had worked for the office, justified in chasing an unarmed Black man through their neighborhood in pickup trucks. Charges only came after video of the shooting surfaced on social media. What does the delayed investigation into the Ahmaud Arbery case reveal about our justice system?
It reveals that we have a justice system that is a tale of two justice systems. It is completely different for African American people and for white people. African American people are largely over-prosecuted, overcharged, and over-sentenced, while white people enjoy sweetheart deals, loopholes, and exonerations, and also judges that help to put their finger, if not their foot, on the scales of justice in the defense, which is what we saw for Kyle Rittenhouse, a judge that absolutely used every ounce of his judicial power to essentially protect, I think, what Americans saw as potentially someone who he thought of as his grandson. And as well as that, the all-white jury. It is more likely that an all-white or a homogeneous jury seeing a white young man feels akin to that young man, feels a sense of respect for him, or at least wants to give him the benefit of the doubt. That benefit of the doubt is never offered to African American people. And I would further suggest that all we need to do is look at a situation like Louisiana, where we have the highest incarceration rate in the world. 33% of our population is African American. Almost 70% of the incarcerated population is African American. And we also have one of the highest wrongful incarceration rates in the world. New Orleans is the highest wrongful incarceration rate in the world, which means we get it wrong more often against Black people than we do against white people.
It is Monday, the 22nd of November of 2021, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is River City Hash Mondays. We made it through the weekend, and looks like the news has been coming hot and heavy from the right-wing spectrum, has it not? Indeed. I've often wondered if there was an infrastructure bill that passed, a once-in-a-generation infrastructure bill that passed and was signed by Joe Biden. If that was signed by Joe Biden in the forest, would anyone know about it? Yeah, we often wonder, because the media seems to think that, who cares about that? Even they don't want to give Joe a win. Almost seems like they're in on the fix, too. Just like that Kid Rittenhouse trial. Yeah, the fix is in. And what are we going to do about it? Well, I keep telling everybody, this is what happens when you don't punch the Nazis. The Nazis will take over. They're going to use our laws against us and then rewrite them and pretty much establish what the law is according to a Nazi. And we've already been through that. I don't think we need to go through it again. Not to the extreme that it happened before. We don't want to go there. Look, the icebox baby gulags are already built, and we've made jokes about putting them in, just for pre-trial holding. Okay, just for pre-trial. They will use them and expand them, make it into a profit, and you're going to have a lot of good Americans, just like good Germans. I was just doing my job. Okay. It looks like the vigilantes have permission. They have permission to violate your constitutional rights. Now, I want to remind folks, only the government can impose a restriction upon a constitutional right. And then you can have redress against that unconstitutional act. Private citizens are not held to the same standard. That's why there is the push for vigilantism. If they can move the enforcement of their ideas upon the majority of the population, and they're going to do it with violence, it's always better to have the citizenry do it against other citizens rather than your law enforcement and military. It's just, optics. And, usually might even have a better enforcement process in the act. I mean, look, East Germany is an example of that. It's what I call the Stasi quo. We already have a bunch of gadfly neighbors upset about all their other neighbors. They can't wait. They can't wait to be able to turn a neighbor in and send them away to the camps. Except we don't think like that. Oh, sure, it passes our mind and we joke about it, but we would never do it. Like that kid who aimed down on Rittenhouse. Now, understand, up to that point, and actually beyond, Rittenhouse was a madman, active shooter. You're at a protest, and somebody starts firing off stuff. I don't care if they're Antifa, if they're the Jewish Resistance, if they're the Commie League of superheroes. I don't care who it is. If they're the fascist young Americans, I'm going to take down that active shooter if I have an opportunity. And I'll be damned if that active shooter gets to claim self-defense after they've killed somebody. So the kid with the skateboard is the true hero. He went up against an AR-15 with a skateboard. And of course, he's called the aggressor because this is how the enabling acts get enabled. Now, I got to tell you, I don't see a lot of chatter on the left wing saying, oh, well, that means we get to go out with our guns and start killing them. But it is rife on the right wing. That chatter is just enormous. Everybody fantasized about being George Zimmerman from that side of the political spectrum. They wanted to kill a black man. Everybody is fantasizing from that side of the political spectrum about being a Kyle Rittenhouse. You mean I get to shoot some commie liberal hippies? Look at those scum. So, the victims in this, their lives are being dragged through the mud. Absolute lies. I guess Rosenbaum had a sex crime, quote, lodged against him when he was 21. He had sexual relations with someone who wasn't quite 18. Now, I'm not going to justify that. There's still a power dynamic there, I understand. But now that's been conflated that he had sex with 5 little boys. And that's a lie put out there by Berbert. Or at least advanced. And then somebody else apparently pulled the knife on their grandma. Another one was supposedly a domestic abuser. Like no cop has ever done that before. And there wasn't actually video of Rittenhouse smacking a girl, a high school girl, punching the hell out of her while his friends held her. Oh, we couldn't look at that because that would be prejudicial to him. Well, fuck, it goes to his, excuse my F-bomb, but it goes to his motivation. Violence is now a political strategy. They are willing to use it. They are talking about not just fantasizing through or, through the acts of another. They think that they can actually go out and do that now. We already have an example of what happens if a, quote, leftist stands their ground. Now, I understand that we don't have the same president and the administration in place now. But a lot happens without the president saying to do it. When that guy so-called Antifa guy up in Portland pulled down on a 3%er, Patriot Prayer guy, a right-wing Nazi, they both pulled down on each other. They both shot at each other, but the leftist hit his mark. There was no stand your ground for the leftist there. There was no claim of self-defense there. He didn't get a chance to claim it because Trump put a hit on him and assigned the U.S. Marshal Service, who pulled some off-duty county cops in Oregon and went and killed the guy, shot him in the back. He was unarmed. No, you have a right to remain silent. We're going to take you to jail. No, they killed him. If Trump could have done it with a drone bomb, he would have done it. U.S. Marshals did a fine job anyway, didn't they? So don't think for 1 minute that we're going to be able to take to the streets armed to the hilt to protect our own. It will not be allowed. And I got to tell you, I don't like guns at protests. Just because they have them doesn't mean we have to have them. Am I asking for us to get shot? No. But I'm not going to go out there fearful that I am. That means the terrorist wins. And you don't negotiate with terrorists. You punch the Nazis and then you punch them again. You hit them in their bank account. You hit them with their reputation. We don't go and use bullets when we're trying to protect the ballot. I don't want to go there. I know at some point it may come to that. I understand. But I take the kung fu attitude. Only as much resistance as is needed. We might have to maim them, but I'm not going to kill them. Don't want to go there. This is a representative democracy, and I'll be damned if they sully it. I'll be damned if they try to take it from us. And that's what they're doing. And I'm sort of saying this to our leadership. Is the filibuster really that important? Really? Are we going to go the way of the Weimar Republic? Or is it the Weimar? Weimar. No, we're not. We won't allow it. Also, I refuse to be gaslit. When the Nazis did what the Nazis did, I'm not going to take what a Nazi says it wasn't the Nazis that did that, it was the commies. It was Lenin. Lenin was the one who told people, to accuse them of what you're doing. No, it was the Nazis. It was Goebbels. It was his thought process. Yeah, Goebbels never went out there and said, the misquote. That's actually in the introduction to a book on Goebbels and propaganda. And every scholar attributes that quote as how Goebbels and the Nazis thought. And they used it with brutal success. It's being used now. It's called the big lie. The big lie was attributed to the Nazis during the Nazi regime, not to the commies. And I'll be damned if Nazis today say, oh, it was Lenin that came up with it. So that means that you're just a stupid liberal. That is Nazi gaslighting, and it is not allowed. And one other thing. How do I explain to my capital investments that I'm a commie? Like all these Nazis and fascists are claiming that I am? How is that possible? I am an American. We kick Nazi and commie ass. If you were so much of a Nazi and a fascist, you think someone who's pretty close to Eisenhower Republican attitudes is a commie? That just shows how much of a Nazi and a fascist you are. You are so far to the right that anything to the left of you is communism. I'm done with it. No more. You don't get a pass anymore. I'm telling you, folks, we need to punch the Nazis. We really do. And I don't mean necessarily punching them in the face. You might have to in the gut. But I would say in the pocketbook. We could start there. And today would be a good day to file a civil suit against Rittenhouse, his mother, and all of his economic enablers. Because the victims who are dead don't get to defend themselves. They were there protecting their community from armed outside agitators who came because of a protest about a black man getting shot 7 times in the back by the cops. And the cops were pissed. And they all but deputized a bunch of right-wing white nationalists, armed to the hilt. I love that, hilt. It said, go at it. In fact, another tidbit of information that was not allowed by the judge was the cops funneling protesters into this group. Have at it. Fight in the prison yard. Guards placing bets on who will win. I wouldn't doubt it one bit. All right, let's get into the curated part of the show because look, oh my gosh, we've rambled on again. It's Monday, though. That's my excuse. Well, what is on the rest of the menu? At the top, I did allude quite a bit to America's growing threat of right-wing vigilantism is in the spotlight. Yes, and we might as well shine a spotlight on it. On the rest of the menu, the GOP embraces practicing medicine without a license as a substitute for vaccines. And I'm not just talking about the COVID vaccine. We're talking about tetanus, mumps, rubella, measles, etc., etc., etc. Workers and families with private health insurance would reap big savings on prescription drugs from a little noticed provision in Biden's social agenda bill. And the U.S. Rhodes Scholars for 2022 include a record number of women, and it's about time. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where the UK will probe racial bias in medical devices after Black and Asian people die disproportionately from COVID-19. And the U.S. seeks a balanced approach as fears grow Russia may invade Ukraine. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the left of the chat room, across the page there to the left near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, is the link to our Patreon page. And if you could please become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, you help us pay our bills, and that allows us then to fly under the radar and continue this resistance against the hostile takeover of the United States of America. If you could afford, say, how about an espresso-type coffee drink, and if you could afford to send those funds our way once a month, it really does help us pay our bills, and it really does allow us to fly under the radar and continue this resistance against the hostile takeover of the United States of America. So thank you for helping us fulfill our civic duty. We take it quite seriously. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, you can do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that, and we thank Tom for doing so. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. And I post the show notes and links diary, incidentally, on Daily Co's about 10 minutes before showtime, and then really try to get that linked up on Twitter and those other social media platforms, and you know which one I am talking about. And the show notes and links are very important, so check it out. You can follow the show on Twitter at CookbookWest. And please do pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever fine podcasts can be found, mixed in with all the rest of us. And we're all there, too. Okay, this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is easy as we start off on this River City Hash Mondays is out of the Associated Press by Anthony Izagiri. Republicans fighting President Joe Biden's coronavirus vaccine mandates are wielding a new weapon against the White House rules, natural immunity. Okay, now I want you to understand, we've had smallpox vaccine really since even before the revolution, where George Washington mandated that his troops get immunized against smallpox at Valley Forge, just so you know. And we've had vaccines for rubella and mumps and measles, etc., etc., etc. And he's saying, throw those all out the window. Your kids don't need any of them. Expose them to the disease, and then if they live, they'll have natural immunity. These people are practicing medicine without a license, and somehow, since they make the laws, they get to do it. Now, they contend that people who have recovered from the virus have enough immunity and antibodies to not need COVID-19 vaccines, and the concept has been invoked by Republicans as a sort of stand-in for vaccines. Florida wrote natural immunity into state law last week as GOP lawmakers elsewhere are pushing similar measures to sidestep vaccine mandates. Lawsuits over the mandates have also begun leaning on the idea. Conservative federal lawmakers have implored regulators to consider it when formulating mandates. Scientists acknowledge that people previously infected with COVID-19 have some level of immunity, but that vaccines offer a more consistent level of protection, and natural immunity is also far from a one-size-fits-all scenario, making it complicated to enact sweeping exemptions to vaccines. That's because how much immunity COVID-19 survivors have depends on how long ago they were infected, how sick they were, and if the virus variant they had is different from mutants circulating now. For example, a person who had a minor case 1 year ago is much different than a person who had a severe case over the summer when the Delta variant was raging through the country. It's also difficult to reliably test whether someone is protected from future infections. The CDC reported in August that COVID-19 survivors who ignored advice to get vaccinated were more than twice as likely to get infected again. A more recent study from the CDC looking at the data from nearly 190 hospitals in 9 states determined that unvaccinated people who had been infected months earlier were 5 times more likely to get COVID-19 than fully vaccinated people who did not have a prior infection. Infection with this virus, if you survive, you do have some level of protection against getting infected in the future, and particularly against getting serious infection in the future, said Dr. David Dowdy of Johns Hopkins. It's important to note, though, that even those who have been infected in the past get additional protection from being vaccinated. Studies also show that COVID-19 survivors who get vaccinated develop extra strong protection, what's called hybrid immunity. When previously infected person gets a coronavirus vaccine, the shot acts like a booster and revs virus-fighting antibodies to high levels. The combination also strengthens another defensive layer of the immune system, helping create new antibodies that are more likely to withstand future variants. The immunity debate comes as the country is experiencing another surge in infections and hospitalizations, and 60 million people remain unvaccinated in a pandemic that has killed more than 770,000 Americans. Biden is hoping more people will get vaccinated because of workplace mandates set to take effect early next year, but which face many challenges in the courts. Ricardo Alonso Saldivar of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. Workers and families with private health insurance would reap savings on prescription drugs from a little notice provision in President Joe Biden's sweeping social agenda bill. It's meant to break the cycle of annual price increases for widely used medicines. That provision would require drug companies to pay rebates to Medicare if they increase prices above the rate of inflation. Drugs sold to private plans would count in calculating the penalty, like a tax on price increases. The issue is dividing business groups in a fierce lobbying battle. Corporate groups focused on affordable employee benefits want to keep the language as is, so it would provide price increase protection for companies and their workers, and not just Medicare enrollees. Other groups, such as the influential U.S. Chamber of Commerce, are backing the pharmaceutical industry's drive to block restraints on pricing, including inflation caps, saying they would stifle innovation. Well, most innovation comes from the government anyway, so shut up. House Democrats passed the roughly $2 trillion social agenda legislation on Friday and sent it to the Senate. The bill resets national priorities on issues from climate to family life and faces more scrutiny in that evenly divided chamber, where the minority gets to rule everything. And if they don't get enough in their minority to rule, they have Manchin and Sinema to help. Prescription drugs are but one component, and most of the attention is focused on Medicare provisions to slash out-of-pocket costs for seniors and allow the program to negotiate prices for a limited number of medicines. But the inflation caps would have far-reaching impact for as many as 180 million Americans with private insurance. A lot of people don't realize that the bill applies to and will help privately insured people, said Sean Greminger, Health Policy Director at the Purchaser Business Group on Health, but that isn't a sure thing. As currently structured, that would be the case, but we've been worried and continue to be worried that will change. His coalition represents nearly 40 large employers that cover more than 50 million workers, retirees, and their families. Inflation caps would be a game changer, said James Gelfand, a vice president of ERIC, a group that represents major national companies as providers of health benefits. Earlier legislation would have based the inflation rebates on sales to Medicare plans, but the House-passed bill broadens the formula to include private plans. Michelle Liu of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The class of U.S. Rhodes Scholars for 2022 includes the largest number of women ever selected for the scholarship in 1 year, the Rhodes Trust announced yesterday, Sunday. Of the 32 students chosen to study at the University of Oxford in England, 22 are women. The Office of the American Secretary of the Trust said in a statement. One of the women selected is Louise Frank, a 21-year-old senior studying biochemistry at South Carolina's Clemson University. Frank said she hopes to merge her interests in science and public policy through a career in healthcare policy. She intends to study politics, philosophy, and economics at Oxford. Frank of Spartanburg, South Carolina, is also the first Clemson student elected to a Rhodes class. She cited her mentors and various academic programs at the school as integral to her success. Also among the winners is Devashish Basnet, a senior studying political science at New York's Hunter College. Basnet arrived in the U.S. as a 7-year-old asylum seeker from Nepal and spent much of his childhood in immigration courts. And immigration, he says, helped turn his interest towards immigration policy. The selection process was completed virtually for the second year in a row due to the coronavirus pandemic. In an otherwise empty classroom at Princeton University, Josh Babu began crying when he heard his name read aloud. The 21-year-old from Scottsdale, Arizona, had planned to go to medical school next year to become a doctor serving LGBTQ populations, a calling he found in college after growing up gay in what he described as a conservative environment. But a Rhodes Scholarship will help Babu embark on a policy career that will touch the lives of many more queer and transgender people, he said. His senior thesis explores the health benefits of gender-affirming medical care for transgender children. That kind of research is necessary, Babu said, because some state lawmakers have sought to limit such care. 3 schools, Claremont McKenna College, Mount Holyoke College, and Union College, have a recipient for the first time in at least 25 years. All 32 scholars were expected to start at Oxford in October, and the scholarship covers financial expenses to attend the school. Applicants must be endorsed by their college or university. Selection committees from 16 U.S. districts then choose and interview finalists before electing 2 students from each district. Well, congratulations, kids. Let us now get to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again. From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. This week, The Trouble with Troubles. Well, Kenneth Branagh's new movie Belfast is placed in that city in the late 1960s, the era of the violent, sectarian so-called troubles there. It's really more of a coming-of-age story, and an autobiographical one at that. So in a project like this, the needle that requires threading is to not trivialize or whitewash a truly horrific period, but also not to make dark and bloody drama not suitable for holiday release. The way that's done here is by making a family-centric movie with fairly low narrative stakes and just enough era ambiance to keep it at least not divorced from reality. The story here is told from the point of view of Buddy, a 10-year-old, about Branagh's age in '69, whose perception of the theological Catholic-Protestant dispute is actually quite precious. His caring parents argue, but never to the point of ugliness. He has adorable and wise grandparents, with these characters brought off by Katrina Balfe as Buddy's mom, Judi Dench as his grandmother, Jamie Dornan as the dad, and the Irish patriarch standard-bearer Ciarán Hinds as grandpa. And they all do a fine job, even if you've seen these characters before. The shooting here is black and white with color reserved for certain scenes like trips to the movies. Musical direction is from Belfast native Van Morrison, who places several of his own radio hits early on. Seems somebody noticed this after they'd been cut in, and in later acts we get other music. And to seal the autobiographical hints, maybe overmuch, we see Buddy reading a Thor comic. We all idealize our youth, so it's probably unreasonable to expect a filmmaker not to as well. The acting, directing, and cinematography in Belfast rescue it from the saccharine, but not by much. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. Catch up with us at take2moviereview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Christopher Intagliata. Just like cows, sheep, and bison roam the earth in herds today, so too did plant-eating dinosaurs, and it appears they began flocking together much earlier than we used to think, just as the Jurassic period was beginning to unfold.
This is really a critical time in the evolution of dinosaurs. This is pretty early on. So the idea is that this type of social behavior may actually contribute to the evolutionary success of dinosaurs.
Jahan Ramazani of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology is a geochronologist. In his words,
I date things, and I date old things in the millions and billions of years, not the really young stuff.
In this case, Ramazani was dating tiny zircon crystals embedded in a fossil bed in Patagonia, near the southern tip of South America. Those crystals dated back to nearly 193 million years ago. And the fossils preserved there, an array of nearly 200 specimens of a plant-eater named Musaurus patagonicus, provide a snapshot of a dinosaur at all stages of its life: eggs and hatchlings, clumps of juveniles, and then further out, adults.
So this kind of undisturbed distribution of fossils and this kind of age segregation basically shows that these dinosaurs had a kind of a social structure. They lived in a colony, and everybody has got things to do, duties with respect to the youngs and the juveniles.
The study in the journal Scientific Reports suggests dinosaurs developed complex social behavior 40 million years earlier than we used to think. And Ramazani says the work also advances long-standing questions about the social structure of dinosaurs.
Was it more like primitive taxa, like the crocodiles, or it looked like the more evolved types of animals like birds and mammals? And we are beginning to see that, yes, it looks more like a mammal or more like a bird type colony.
Whatever type of social structure it was, the scientists hypothesized that it helped large, plant-eating dinosaurs first spread across the planet, kickstarting tens of millions of years of dominion on Earth. Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Christopher Intagliata.
He seems sorry.
We very clearly told him not to look up there.
I'm honestly impressed that he was able to do it.
Right? What, did he balance on that big chair?
Yeah, I I guess he'll just know what his gifts are this year.
I really thought we had hidden them well.
If they can find their presents, they can find a gun.
911, what is your emergency?
Every day, 8 kids and teens are unintentionally killed or injured by loaded and unlocked guns. Learn how to make your home safer at endfamilyfire.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council and End Family Fire.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
As a writer, I get stuck every so often straining for the right words to tell my story. Over the years, though, I've learned when to quit tying myself into mental knots over sentence construction, instead stepping back and rethinking where my story is going. This process is essentially what millions of American working families are going through this year, as record numbers of them are shocking bosses, politicians, and economists by stepping back and declaring, "We quit." Most of the quits are tied to very real abuses that have become ingrained in our workplaces over the past couple of decades. Poverty paychecks, no health care, unpredictable schedules, no child care, understaffing, forced overtime, unsafe jobs, sexist and racist managers, tolerance of aggressively rude customers, and so awful much more. Specific grievances abound, but at the core of each is a deep, inherently destructive executive suite malignancy, disrespect. The corporate system has cheapened employees from valuable human assets worthy of being nurtured and advanced to a bookkeeping expense that must be steadily eliminated. It's not just about paychecks. It's about feeling valued, feeling that the hierarchy gives a damn about the people doing the work. Yet, corporate America is going out of its way to show that it doesn't care. And, of course, workers notice. So unionization is booming. Millions who were laid off by the pandemic are refusing to rush back to the same old grind, and now millions who have jobs are quitting. This is much more than an unusual unemployment stat. It's a sea change in people's attitude about work itself and life. This is Jim Hightower saying people are rethinking where their story is going and how they can take it in a better direction. Yes, nearly everyone will eventually return to work, but workers themselves have begun redefining the job and rebalancing it with life. Howdy-ho, folks. Thanks for tuning in and sharing my weekly commentaries. Also, please join me for a live web show I host every other Tuesday, the Hightower Lowdown Happy Hour at the Chat and Chew Cafe. You can join the action live online as I chat with grassroots leaders and progressive sparklies from around the country. Go to hightowerlowdown.org/chatandchew to find out about upcoming guests and watch past episodes. That's hightowerlowdown.org/chatandchew.
Welcome to 60 Second Civics, the daily podcast of the Center for Civic Education. I'm Mark Gage. Benjamin Franklin was an important founder of the United States and a man who exemplified the Age of Enlightenment in America. Franklin was born in 1706, right in the middle of the Enlightenment era. His family was very large. He had 16 brothers and sisters, and he was largely self-educated. Franklin established his reputation in Philadelphia as a clever writer and successful printer. This made him wealthy, and he devoted large sums of money to improving life for the people of Philadelphia. He established the country's first subscription library in 1731, founded the American Philosophical Society in 1743, and helped found both the University of Pennsylvania and the nation's first hospital. Franklin had the insatiable curiosity and willingness to experiment that typified intellectual thought during the Enlightenment. As a scientist, Franklin performed experiments with electricity, lightning, and ocean currents, among many others. Franklin invented the lightning rod as a method for saving houses from being burned down during lightning strikes. Finally, Franklin played a key role in the foundation of the United States. He helped draft the American Declaration of Independence, obtained critical French support for the Revolutionary War, and was one of the American negotiators for the Treaty of Paris, which ended the war. Near the end of his life, Franklin was the respected elder statesman at the Philadelphia Convention, which drafted the U.S. Constitution. That's all for today's podcast, 60 Second Civics, where civic education only takes a minute.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1919. That was the day 4 leaders of the Carpenters Union were shot dead in Bogalusa, Louisiana. The United Brotherhood of Carpenters and the International Union of Timber Workers had embarked on an organizing drive of white and black workers at the Great Southern Lumber Company. Bogalusa functioned as a company town. Lumber bosses controlled company housing, local politicians, and ruled the town with an iron fist. By 1919, the two unions began organizing among loggers and sawmill workers in the region. The carpenters initially organized among white, skilled workers, while the timber workers organized among unskilled, mostly black workers. They soon stepped up efforts to organize jointly. Historian Stephen Norwood notes that when Great Southern threatened to forcibly break up a union meeting among black workers, armed white union men arrived to defend the meeting. By September, 95% of the workforce was organized when the company instituted a lockout. On November 21st, a posse of local businessmen fired on the home of leading black organizer Saul Dacus, who narrowly escaped. The following day, armed white union carpenter leaders Stanley O'Rourke and J.P. Bouchillon escorted Dacus to the Central Trades and Labor Council offices. 150 special policemen were immediately dispatched. They began firing upon union headquarters, killing O'Rourke, Bouchillon, and 2 other union leaders, Thomas Gaines and Lem Williams. Dacus was nearly lynched and escaped with his life to New Orleans. Norwood concludes the gun battle represents probably the most dramatic display of interracial labor solidarity in the Deep South during the first half of the 20th century. For historian Walter P. Jones, the anti-union violence and racial terror would culminate in 1923 with a massacre in the Florida lumber town of Rosewood.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy River City Hash Mondays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River and the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 33 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting a high in the low to mid 50s. We are currently under a very dense, an active dense fog advisory, and so do take care if you happen to have an active dense fog activity in your area. Some clouds this morning will give way to generally sunny skies in the afternoon, winds light and variable. Tonight we'll have lows in the upper 30s with considerable cloudiness and occasional rain showers. Winds light and variable, expecting to bring something a little more than 1/10 of an inch is what they're expecting. And then tomorrow, highs around 50, a shower or 2 around the area in the morning, then partly cloudy in the afternoon, winds light and variable. Confirmed cases of coronavirus in Jackson County, of course, have not been updated since the end of Friday, though they have increased since we reported on them on Friday, and they now stand at 244,050 cases with 347 confirmed deceased. Our numbers keep increasing, and they want to prove that natural immunity works. I think it's proving it doesn't. Pollen is rated as none right outside the window here in Rogue River proper. The air quality index for the region is 25 parts per million, and the daytime UV index is low at level 2. Barometric pressure is falling at 30.25 inches. Visibility is down to a half mile, and relative humidity is at 95%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 49 and sunny. Paris is 45 and partly cloudy. Rome is 60 degrees and partly cloudy. Kyiv is 39 and mostly cloudy. Kabul is 43 and clear. Hong Kong is 57 and mostly cloudy. Tokyo is 56 and cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 62 and cloudy. San Francisco, California is 52 degrees and sunny. And New York, New York is 48 degrees Fahrenheit and fair. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Jill Lawless of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The British government is investigating whether built-in racial bias in some medical devices led to Black and Asian people getting sick and dying disproportionately from COVID-19. The health secretary said yesterday, Sunday, that the pandemic had highlighted health disparities along race and gender lines. He said that a third of intensive care admissions in Britain at the height of the pandemic were people from Black and ethnic minority backgrounds, more than double their share of the population. Britain's Statistics Office has found that in the first year of the pandemic, up to March of 2021, Black and South Asian people in the UK had higher death rates than their white compatriots, even after factors like occupations and underlying health conditions were taken into account.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Newman Merchant of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The buildup of Russian troops near Ukraine has left U.S. officials perplexed, muddying the Biden administration's response. Some Republican lawmakers have been pressing the U.S. to step up military support for Ukraine, but that risks turning what may be mere muscle flexing by Putin into a full-blown confrontation that only adds to the peril for Ukraine and could trigger an energy crisis in Europe. But a weak U.S. response carries its own risks. It would embolden Putin to take more aggressive steps against Ukraine. As fears grow, he could try to seize more of its territory, and it could cause more political damage for President Joe Biden at a time his popularity is dropping. Is it really, though? Knowing how to strike the right balance would be easier if the U.S. had a better understanding of what Putin was trying to accomplish, but top officials admit they just don't know. Well, we better find out quick, and I have a pretty good idea, too, especially when the little green men start showing up. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we're going to meet up tomorrow for Terrytown Chowder Tuesdays. And isn't the weather just appropriate for it? It is. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goer. Je voudrais toujours te plaire, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver, dans mon jardin d'hiver.